Today, I want to start with a question. What's the most powerful word in the English language? Here's a hint. It has 4 letters, begins with F, and ends with K, and it's not your first thought. We're talking about the most powerful word in the English language. It's feedback, or FDBK for short. This word can build people up or break them down. The power is in how feedback is given and received. Let's jump in with a story. A manager pulls you aside after a performance review cycle. She's a strong leader, genuinely invested in her team. But something went sideways this last quarter. One of her best people has gone quiet, and a second is already updating his resume. You can tell the team is restless. What they have in common is that they both received feedback in their performance reviews, and both walked away feeling diminished rather than developed. The manager, she's not a harsh person. In fact, she's amazingly competent and quite relatable. She did not intend to discourage anyone, but somewhere between her intent and their experience, the feedback landed the wrong way. The words she meant as direction felt like judgment. The performance gaps she named felt like indictments. And now, the trust she has spent the last 2 years building has a fracture in it that a follow-up conversation simply will not fully repair. This is the paradox of feedback. The same information that can unlock someone's potential can also erode their confidence and damage the relationships, sometimes forever. Here's a key point. The difference is rarely the content itself. It's almost never what was said, and almost always how it is given and how it is received. So welcome back to the Rethink Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Zierk. This podcast is where we step back, pause, reflect, and explore smarter, more connected ways to lead and live by. Thinking with connection in mind, which is exactly what is meant by the word rethink, relationship-enhanced thinking. Rethinking your connection to yourself, the people in your life, and the world around you. Today, we're going to rethink the topic of feedback. As I mentioned at the top of this broadcast, feedback is one of the most powerful tools available in leadership, parenting, coaching, and any relationship where growth really matters. At its best, feedback nourishes the mind and the soul with insight and perspective. It provides data about actions and behaviors and results. It builds skills and strengthens relationships and increases self-awareness in ways that experience alone cannot. But at its worst, feedback destroys confidence, activates shame, as well as defensiveness, and damages the very trust it depends on to be effective. Now, most people understand that feedback matters, often very, very deeply. In fact, feedback is one of the most powerful ways to learn and grow. But very few of us take advantage of feedback by asking for it. I find that curious. And many of us lack a clear framework for making feedback constructive rather than corrosive. The challenge is that feedback is rarely just information. Feedback lands inside a person's sense of identity, their core sense of competence, their sense of belonging, and even their relationship safety. So in that way, feedback both shapes and misshapes our sense of self. It's that powerful and impactful. That is why the same words delivered two different ways can either open someone up or shut them down entirely. Have you ever felt confused after the feedback that you gave landed poorly? I want to pause here for just a moment because this conversation connects directly to the work I do with leaders and teams. Hi everyone, David here, taking just a quick break from today's episode to let you know that I also bring the ideas we explore on the Rethink podcast into organizations through keynote speaking and leadership programs. I work with leaders and teams who want to navigate conflict, strengthen trust, and communicate with more clarity and more confidence, especially when change, tension, or uncertainty gets in the way. My keynote, called Turn Conflict into Connection, gives audiences practical tools to understand what's happening beneath the conflict, repair what's strained, and move towards stronger conversations, better decisions, and high-performing teams. To learn more about bringing this message to your organization, visit davidzierk.com/speaking. Now, let's get back to the episode. Thanks for letting me share that. Now let's get back to today's conversation. The topic of feedback, it's not optional when you want to optimize your leadership style. So let's talk about how to give feedback as well as receive it to inspire growth and connection. Effective feedback shares 5 qualities. First, feedback is specific. So I'm going to my board and writing the word specific. It's the first quality. Offering clear and concrete observations rather than general impressions, that hits the mark. That's feedback that's on target. When feedback is specific, it gets people's attention and places them in a learning mindset. Because in order to learn, a person has to have an open mind, and that's what specific feedback does. It also reduces confusion. It lowers defensiveness, and it takes out of the process any kind of guesswork, because it focuses on observable facts rather than assumptions about a person's character or intentions. So, for example, telling someone, you explained the process clearly and used helpful examples. Now, that's far more useful than simply saying, good job. I hope you get an understanding of the power of specificity. Specific feedback is really important. It's foundational to allow a person to open their mind and begin receiving the feedback that's about to be given. Second, feedback needs to be timely. What I mean by timely feedback is shared at a moment when the person is positioned to hear and use it. So you might probably ask yourself, well, when is the right time to deliver feedback? And the answer is when the person feels safe and supported. Without safety and support, we all become defensive and imbalanced. So you get an understanding of when feedback is not expected, it's going to only be partially received or be received in a very guarded fashion. That's the reason why the timeliness feature is really critically important in order to optimize the importance and the effectiveness of feedback. The third condition is doing it respectfully. So I'm writing down respectful. So feedback that's respectful, it's delivered with care and empathy for the person that's receiving it. Without respect, the words you offer, no matter how carefully chosen, will be rejected or only partially accepted and likely misinterpreted. You can count on it. Nobody likes to be disrespected. You can take that to the bank. On the other side of the coin, everybody. Everybody opens their minds when treated with respect. It strengthens the connections between two people when they feel respected. The fourth part is actionable. Feedback needs to be actionable. Now, what do I mean by actionable feedback? Well, it's pointing towards something the person can actually do differently. Remember, feedback is meant to be helpful, a guide to a better future. So that's the reason why it focuses on a behavior that a person can do so that they can move their performance in a different direction, which also sets the stage for validation. Finally, feedback needs to be balanced or fair. It's a very powerful word, fair feedback. And by doing so, you're acknowledging what is working alongside what needs to grow. That's the balance piece. Here's what's working. Here's what needs to grow. And with that balance process, you're facilitating a person's receptivity to the feedback. And what's interesting is when any of these 5 elements are missing, the feedback tends to produce the opposite of its intent. Vague feedback creates confusion and self-doubt. Poorly timed feedback, well, that triggers defensiveness. A person is not interested in receiving it. They become very guarded. Feedback delivered without empathy reads as criticism. Criticism of the person rather than the behavior. And that's really important because I believe one of the most important life skills is to understand that the person is never the problem. So that's the reason why feedback that focuses on behavior increases the odds exponentially of this feedback doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, inspiring growth and development. And then feedback with no direction leaves people feeling discouraged. And feedback that only identifies gaps without acknowledging any strengths, that's that imbalanced piece, that erodes confidence over time. Now, the goal is not to make feedback comfortable. It's to make it useful. I want you to really understand that difference. There is going to be a level or a degree of discomfort associated with giving some kind of feedback, but when it's done well, by following these 5 qualities, it becomes extraordinarily useful and mutually beneficial. Let me give you an example. Consider a team leader giving a mid-year check-in to someone who's been missing deadlines. Now, a destructive version of that conversation focuses on the pattern in a way that implies a character conclusion. So, for instance, the message delivered was probably, this person is unreliable, disorganized, and not ready for more responsibility. As you can imagine, the employee leaves the meeting feeling judged and defensive. And the behavior is unlikely to change because shame rarely produces growth. No, let me elevate that thought. Actually, shame never produces growth. Shame is belittling. It's having the person become a smaller version of themselves and going into a desperate, very primal protective state. That's what shame does. Now, by comparison, a constructive version of the same conversation names the specific instances, there's the specificity, connects them to the impact on the team, asks a genuine question about what is getting in the way. There's some empathy. And closes with a clear and supported path forward. That's the actionable piece. And by receiving it that way, the employee leaves with insight, a plan, and the sense that their leader believes that they can course correct. Positivity enters into the environment. The person increases in their motivation to perform not only well for their manager, but also for themselves. That is feedback doing exactly what it's designed to do. By the way, this whole idea, this whole principle about feedback, it also applies at home. A parent who tells a child, you never follow through. Well, you can imagine, it feels like it's delivering a verdict. the child shuts down, goes to a negative place, kind of puts them into defensive mode or maybe even a very protective and survival mode. Either way, the child disconnects from the parent, has received the information or the feedback in a really mismanaged way, and there's a disconnect that decreases the probability of learning the right life lesson. They're going to learn either I'm the problem or I don't like that parent. By contrast, a parent who says, I noticed you left this unfinished 3 times this week. Let's put our heads together and figure out what's making this so hard. And by delivering it in that way, that's an invitation. Do you see how one style closes the conversation and the other one opens it? So these 5 features I put down on the board, that's all about how to give feedback. But as we know, feedback is a two-way street. There's also the reception of it. So receiving feedback and doing it well is its own skill, and it deserves just as much attention as we talked about previously about giving it. And the reason for that is the instinct when we're receiving feedback is to defend, deflect, or dismiss. That's all very, very natural reflexes that we do, particularly when the feedback touches something tied to identity or self-worth. It feels like an attack. And of course, when we're attacked, we put up our defenses, put up our guard, put up our wall, and we're not interested in getting any more information, and we go into that survival mode that I've been talking about. The more useful response moves through 5 steps. So the first step of receiving feedback is to listen. But listening without defensiveness. Now think about that. You're listening without putting up the walls. You're staying open to it. You're keeping yourself into learning mode. And then, by having gathered that information, it's a good time to reflect. Reflect on the message. And by reflecting on the message, you're preventing yourself from reacting. Big difference. Very important pause. So we always have 2 choices. Information comes in, we can reflect on that, hold it, examine it, or we can respond in a very primal way and just react. So we're listening to it all, reflecting on it. Third step is to discern. We're trying to discern what is genuinely useful and releasing what is not. So you're understanding it's a very active process of separating the wheat from the chaff. Because not all feedback is going to land well. Not all feedback is going to be applicable in terms of your assessment of what's going on. But I do want you to actively discern the information that you're receiving and asking yourself what's genuinely useful here and releasing what is not. In other words, don't get caught in the weeds. Don't get lost in the details. Kind of understand the big picture. And that's what discernment allows us to do. And then we get to apply it. You get to apply the feedback that you receive and asking yourself, what serves your growth? And whatever that you've identified as being useful and seems to be productive in terms of helping you move in a positive direction, that's how you can serve your own growth. And that's the power of feedback. And there is a 5th quality. This is one that's probably going to surprise some people. And it's called appreciation. Now, what's fascinating about feedback is that when you appreciate the person that cared enough to say something at all, well, you've really facilitated a bidirectional connection with that person because you're in a state of appreciation. Whether or not you say appreciative words, that's really not that relevant. But staying open, leading into the conversation, kind of remaining attentive to and alert to what's going on, that's how you can show appreciation. And that last step of appreciation, it's often the hardest and most important. It's important because you need to keep in mind that to give feedback requires courage from the giver, especially when they do it with style. So it requires courage for the giver to give feedback, and receiving it with grace honors that gift. So for leaders specifically, the practice worth building is separating the behavior from the person in every feedback conversation, both when you're giving and when you are receiving feedback. Feedback delivered to a behavior creates an opportunity for adjustment. Feedback delivered to an identity tends to calcify. And the person takes it personally, feels like attacked on their sense of self. They go into a protective state. That's the calcification. So let me recap. The 4 letters at the center of this framework spell out what feedback is actually meant to do. The F, let me go to a new page. So I'm putting up the word putting up the acronym feedback again. I wanted to show you something. The F stands for feed. It feeds the mind with insight. And the D, it provides data. Data that shows what is working and what needs adjustment. Do you understand that? That balance shows what's working and what needs adjustment. And that's the reason why this data-sensitive approach is really, really critically important. You lead with something that's working, then you can segue to talking about where the greatest opportunities for improvement lie. That's the importance of data. And with that, feedback allows for a building opportunity to build skills and confidence and to strengthen the relationship. That's really important to remember that feedback actually, when it's done well, it strengthens the relationship, which then facilitates the opportunity to both have that reciprocity. The other person gives you feedback, and now you guys are both in different ways strengthening the relationship. And then the K, in the FDPK, the most powerful word in the English language, it helps people to know their impact and how to grow. It gives them direction. And that's the function of insight. Every one of those outcomes depends on how feedback moves between people. I want you to understand that feedback is like an energy source. If I lead with something that's very negative, I do it in a very imbalanced way, I am procuring negative energy between self and other. So things aren't going to go well. In fact, they're going to probably cascade in a downward fashion. Alternatively, if I really pay attention to these different steps associated with the feedback process and follow the framework that's been outlined, that's moving people together, is facilitating the strength of connection, and it improves the opportunity for information shared to get to the next level. That's the reason why the same conversation can either unlock potential or limit it. The same words can strengthen a relationship or fracture it. Learning to give feedback with specificity, care, and actionable direction, and to receive it with openness and discernment is one of the highest leverage skills available to any leader, any parent, any colleague who wants to build something that lasts. So, beyond experimenting with and integrating the 5 practices in navigating how to give and receive feedback, I'd like to invite you to visit my website at davidzierk.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter called Refresh, download a ton of resources, read a blog or 2, and learn more from my quizzes and speaker topics. I also have a YouTube channel called Whiteboard Psychology, where I make learning about psychology visible and relatable. I also share quick tips on relationship intelligence on YouTube and Instagram. Little pops of wisdom that really help you understand the importance of turning conflict into connection. So as always, this has been fun. Till next time, keep rethinking how you show up and do life.